Okay, we'll start here at 2:33. I'd like to call to order. This is a continuation of the Budget Committee meeting on Thursday, October 10th, 2024, in order to facilitate and review the draft of 2025 tax support budgets for the City of Kawartha Lake. So we'll continue and we'll start off with 4.1.1. And we'll just wait for a second for Councillor Joyce here. Okay. Okay, so we'll start to review the draft of 2025 Special Budget Project 4.1, and we'll leave it open to the floor. I know there's some questions, and if we want to start with Councillor Joyce, you had some questions I think you sent in.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just start off the top. My first question was, what is the debt ratio percentage in the latest budget forecast?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we are still well within the 10% debt servicing ratio as defined by Council.
Yeah. Thank you. And actually, I should have started off in thanking staff and bringing it the last pass down from wherever it was in the double digits down to a 1.1% forecast. I think that's really terrific work. Thank you for that. Solid waste EA under special projects is forecast to be $2 million a year over a 5-6 year period starting in 2024. But my question is, the SSO program will reduce landfill injects significantly. If we looked at other regions with long experience, look at their data, it will extend our landfill capacity. So with this in mind, can we push this particular special project, which is represents a significant portion of special projects for 2025 into 2026 as a start date? Do we have that data? And let's take a look at
it. So through you, Mr. Chair, so the solid waste EA, which we're cash flowing for $2 million in the next 4 years, is a long process. So it's not your typical municipal class EA. So let me back up. I just want to sort of set the framework. So the EA Act is overarching. So there's an EA Act for municipalities. There's an EA Act for transportation, for MTO. There's an EA Act for rail. So they're all sort of unique. They all fall under the EA Act in general. So then we go to the municipal class EA, and that has different layers. It has an A, a B, a C. A plus, B, and C. And they're all basically there's a pre-recipe. So it says if you're doing a Schedule B EA, this is your recipe on how you do a Schedule B. And it sets out the terms of reference are predetermined. It says how do you report, what do you have to look at, what criteria you have to look at, and even though the projects are unique, it's a road project, it's a bridge project, the process is a recipe, right? You have to do consultations with these people, all that good stuff. And then you have what's called an individual EA. And you can have an individual EA for a municipality, for a rail company, for a highway, a provincial highway. They fall out of that recipe, and it's called an individual EA. And landfills or solid waste fall under the individual EA category. So even though it's done by a municipality, it's not classified as a municipal class EA, it's an individual EA. The biggest, not the biggest, but one of the criteria for an individual EA is that the terms of recipe or the terms of reference or the recipe isn't set out. It's unique to every single one of them. And you have to go through the terms of reference. You have to submit that to the minister. The minister then has to approve it, says, yes, your recipe is good. Then you have to enact all those elements of that recipe. And the terms of reference alone could last up to 2 years. It could be shorter, or it could be up to 2 years. So that's sort of the unknown. That's why we're asking to start this sooner than later, because the duration of an individual EA is very volatile. As opposed to a municipal class EA, we could do a municipal class EA in 1.5 to 2 years max. Whereas an individual EA could be 4 to 5 years, it could be 8 years, right? Very unknown. And our landfill operations does have a diversion project where you divert mattresses, construction, SSOs, all that stuff, that would extend the life of that landfill if we hit our diversion numbers. But now you're banking on two different things, right? You're banking on a smaller duration for an individual EA, which may be 2 to 3 times or 2 to 3 years longer than anticipated, and you're hoping to meet your targets on your diversion. And that's it's risky. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's risky. And we would like to err on the conservative side. So yes, it could be deferred. We would hope that the individual EA process is shorter than longer, and we would hope that we exceed or meet our diversion targets. That's a lot of ifs. And if we don't meet those, then the risk is we don't have a landfill to put our waste, right? So that's why, can it be cash flow? Yes, as long as you acknowledge the inherent risks with it.
Thank you. So what you're really saying then is SSO data diversion has not been taken into account because of your fear of inherent possible risks.
Correct. There's been some, I think, minor assumptions made when Dr. Fallon put it in, but we have no practical data. We have theoretical data because the SSO is new. It's only starting in 2025, right? So we have we have data from other municipalities, great, and there's been some conservative assessments made. But I'm not sure what the how our estimates compare to what our targets are, right? So it's a very high level estimate for diversion based on SSOs.
Anybody have comments on that before I get to my next question?
Councillor Richardson.
Through you, and that's why I'm going to hit the tag here, just because it is still in the landfill site works realm of questions. Is it safe to say that when we're looking at the projects that are forecasted this year, you have state of good repair and expansionary, but most of these are debenture moving forward, are they not? Because they are over the longer period, just when we're looking at the final numbers?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So if you're looking specifically for the solid waste EA, 12% is DCable of the 2 million. We are getting 1.7 million, 1.742 million from the Special Projects Reserve. And then we're getting 240,000 from the DC Reserve, and a small amount, 17,200 from the General Contingency Reserve. So the lion's share, 1.7 million, is coming from Special Projects Reserve.
That's what I thought. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Councillor Joyce.
If we did push it back here, do we lose the 12% of DC?
Your Chair, no.
Yes, CEO Taylor.
Chair, and through you, and thanks for the explanation. I get the other, we answered partially this question last week as well, of the sense of urgency with it as well. it's not just an open-ended sort of formula where you've got SSO coming in, and so you're getting relief on landfill. At the same time, some of our landfills are reaching their capacity at a fixed time frame, and two of them, I believe, are planned to close within sort of the study cycle. And so it will, even though SSO will be then providing relief overall, it's to look at, is that enough of a footprint, or even having to start looking at another new landfill footprint. So I just want to stress that there is a sense of urgency to this. It was deferred conceptually last year as well, because of the sort of budget pressures. It will continue to be a pressure. It's a tough one, but I think there is a fixed time period, even though it feels like it's answering a question for 5 years down the road. It really is a high priority project.
Okay, thank you. So the committee would really, the council of councillors on the committee would really like to see a 3% tax increase versus the current 4.1, and that's ignoring, taking the police services and the capital levy out of the equation for the moment. Okay, because we know that we're not touching that. So how do we take it down another 1.1%? So if we can't touch the solid waste EA, can we just debenture? And how much debenture will it take this to remove this 1.1% entirely? What will happen where does our debt ratio go? And can you give us a sense of how much that will cost us in the long term? Because we're basically borrowing another, 1.4, 1.5 million to do this? Am I right?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. First off, if I could ask Constance to proceed to slide 28. Secondly, more specifically on the debt question, you cannot, under the Municipal Act, borrow for your operating budget. So we cannot remove the 1.6 by virtue of borrowing. What we can do is come up with options for you and continue refining the 1.1% until that 1.6 million is at zero.
I just going, the refine further sounds great. What would the process be there?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So when we spoke on this slide, it was only last Thursday, we talked about some new growth that was coming into the municipality, that we might revise our supplementary tax figures. We are going to review every reserve and see where there is opportunity to apply some service-specific reserves into 2025. We are still awaiting word from the province on the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund that may come with a small increase. I don't want to bank on it yet. We won't know until later in October. But between now and November 12th deliberations, I would be confident to suggest that we can continue fine-tuning this 1.1% and get that down to a very minimal impact.
Through you, Chair, if I can. I think that's where we kind of landed on Thursday is, that final 1.1. How do we absorb it without compromising our state of good repair, with compromising any of our expansionary projects that we do need to move forward with? Because we do recognize that, you do push things down the road, they generally end up costing more. And I know we have some opportunities, as Director Bukaboom has just fleshed out, the fact that there could be some stability in some of those numbers. And I think sitting around the table looking at where we left on Thursday, and I know I took the budget in front of me home on this weekend and went through it line by line and recognized how tight it is. And I'm wondering if that's the direction of this committee, Chair, is that we ask staff to see if they can find some stability in that 1.1 so we can absorb it.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if that was the direction Budget Committee provided to staff, that would be the exercise we would undertake. And we would continue going through and as painlessly as possible, finding areas to reduce that to 1.6 by sharing the burden with all the departments. But again, we also have some mitigating things that had just popped up last week on the Thursday night on growth, for instance. That would be a significant component of this 1.6, and you could task us with finding that remainder 1.1.
Yeah, I think you bring up some pretty good points there with more growth, which we knew where that was going to be, which we don't know what the number is going to be. Looking at our reserve, because we need to look at the reserve, what's going to save money now without hurting us in the future. And provincial partnership funds, hopefully within a little luck, we might be able to get something like that too. So definitely a way to look at that going forward. Any other questions or concerns with that? Yep, go ahead, continue.
Thank you, Chair. I do have more questions. That's great answers. Thank you. And I'd also like to point out that from my perspective, and I think Councillor Richardson and McDonald agree with me, that all the departments that made presentations, I think did a good job in defending what they need to maintain services. And I respect that. But going back to find more savings would be great. One thing, we've talked about deferring capital projects is not a good thing to do because it costs us more down the road, but I did send an email out identifying the raw material price index and the industrial product price index has shown to have stabilized, and that if you can find the project to defer, we won't see the spikes that we saw, inflationary spikes we saw through COVID. It'll be more reasonable. Yes, it will cost more, but it's back to the norm of inflationary costs pre-COVID of somewhere between 2% and 4%. So that's something to consider. Another question I had is fees and charges are actually forecast to be $20,000 less in 2025. So what is the percentage average increase for our fees and charges in the current draft budget? And maybe we add another 1% to that to increase our revenue flow.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Currently, the fees and charges bylaws dealt with in front of council for the calendar year, so you'll be seeing it shortly for January 1, 25. As you recall, last year when we did increase some fees, some were reversed. It's not a unilateral across the board. It's not as easy as just saying, let's take 2% CPI and place that across the board. And is it worth it when it's a $5 charge at an arena, for instance? However, what we are going to undertake at SMT is a review of which charges are what I might say egregiously or not at full cost recovery, and we know that. We would implement an increase in that area, and that may also assist in the $1.6 million or that 1.1%. We're just reviewing the 24 actuals with a fine-tooth comb to find out how our fees and charges did perform in 2024, and that will help us understand, is there some true cost right sizing to some of those fees into 25? And again, we would use that strategy as part of that 1.1%.
That sounds good. I have some personal thoughts on that, so, for public skating, that's an environment we want to encourage. But somebody owns a boat, maybe they can afford a bit more for a dock. Just throwing that out there. Matt, the municipal accommodation tax. That's something we have not implemented. I know we can't, even if we start tomorrow, it would not be implemented 2025, but has staff looked at that as a possible another revenue flow? And if you have any picture of what that might look like, that maybe we see that in 2026?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Great question. We did endeavor to include that into the revenue strategy that we committed to bringing back to you spring of 2025, so that we would look at some avenues there. Vacancy tax was another one. I think you yourself had listed 2 or 3, and we've picked those up into our notes to include. In terms of the MAT tax, that would specifically be used for tourism, so it wouldn't help your overall bottom line or your tax, other than replacing some of the funding that is tax supported. So we are looking at a myriad of different fees and charges and how to bring you a revenue strategy that is fluid, meets the needs, and is incorporated into our long-term plan. It's an area we have yet to refine a little bit more, if you will, in our long-term financial plan, and we're committed to doing that in the next 6 months.
Thank you, Director Bukuum. On that, and excuse the pun, but the fluid part, another one is, I'm trying to remember the name now, where it's water flow,
Stormwater.
thank you, the
levy.
storm water surcharge levy. Thank you for that. I couldn't remember the exact name for it. Has that been looked at, and is there, given our physical structure of our community, is that worth it to even look at?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we did commit to including that in our revenue strategy as well. Sorry, there was one other that had been discussed at a previous budget committee. I can share that an experience in a previous municipality I was with, this is voluminous engineering-driven work. So our colleague, Director Rojas, will have to determine the imperviousness of all of the properties, and it will switch the tax base over to those properties, most predominantly contributing to the stormwater. I would suggest that would not be feasible within a 1-year time period, but I'll defer to Director Rojas on that one.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So we do have an area rating charge for drainage. It's the Drainage Act, right? It's usually in rural areas. We have a municipal drain. We have several. We have, I think, 70 individual municipal drains, probably a little bit more now, which essentially acts the same way, right? You collect water, you discharge water, and you're assessed for your benefit. It's essentially what you're talking about, just in the urban area, as opposed to only in agricultural rural areas. So other municipalities have done it. It's essentially a third utility when you put it in layman's terms, right? You're paying for water, you're paying for drinking water, you're paying for sanitary sewer, and a stormwater water charge is essentially a third utility that would have to be implemented. It is a little bit controversial in the urban areas. We are proposing a stormwater master plan in our special projects for 2025. As part of that stormwater master plan, we will evaluate a stormwater utility. I won't call it a utility, I'll call it something else. But we are going to evaluate that theme for urban areas and maybe bring a policy or have a discussion during the stormwater master plan study. I think it's premature to do it now, but it's something that we could discuss in 2025. And if there's an appetite for it, maybe implement in 2026 or 2027.
Well, thank you for that. We are, with increased costs, we have to, at the same time, look for other strategies of revenue. We'd have to look at what the actual revenue would be. Is it worth it to pursue? And obviously the controversy that surrounds that as well. So I had another question here, and this is all theoretical, and this is a very difficult one to answer, and if you can't answer it, I completely understand. If we accept the current proposal, current draft at the 1.1% above the 3%, as is, what does 2026 look like? And the reason I ask is, if I use round numbers for a moment here, a 4% tax increase this year, can we balance that off in 2026 with just a 2% tax increase this year? This is keeping police services and the capital tax levy out of the equation at the moment. With that argument, we're looking ahead a full year, so I don't, that's an unfair, it may be an unfair question, so.
Through you, Mr. Chair, sorry, I saw another light on, I was going to let through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor question. Great question. Our long-term planning update that we keep putting all our weight in for spring of 2025 is going to help us inform what the longer-term forecast looks like. But I think we've been quite clear, June 4th, September 12th, October 10th to committee last week, 3% is not financially sustainable given the range of services, the need to support the growth in terms of the non-DC eligible component. Our operating budget will continue to increase based on the infrastructure that we'll be building. Somebody has to operate it now, somebody has to plow it. What we will balance is the growth coming in consideration of those costs. So to be able to sit here today and say that 2% as opposed to 3%, I would be more apt to say 4% is the new 3%.
Very succinct, thank you. That answers the question, I think, quite well. Chair, I think that's it for my questions at the moment. I may have some more, but.
Councillor Richardson?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I could have answered that because I was just going to ask you, 3% is not sustainable any longer. Like, we have to get away from that 3%, and it's not what the public wants to hear, but if we're looking at like long-term financial planning sitting around this table right now, I keep looking at that and going, 3% is just not sustainable, and that's kind of where you just answered Councillor Joyce's question with the same thing, and that's the red herring for me when I'm looking at this. So if we're not able to fine-tune, and we're asking you guys to go back and fine-tune that 1.1, could it come down to council actually looking at cutting some services so we can?
So through the chair, so you can influence that number now if you wish, either theoretically by saying, set a new target, try to eliminate that number. That then all gets recommended through to the mayor, and then the mayor will propose a budget. And it'll land somewhere, right? It'll be at 3 plus something. You haven't weighed in yet sort of deliberately on the policing sort of cost as well, but that will come later in the meeting. The mayor will then sort of fine tune or finalize his proposed budget or the proposed budget. It might have some further reductions, and if you were providing guidance, we would try to help to find relief on some of the directions that you'd be providing. It then goes into the council realm entirely. So you'll be at a starting point as council, and you have the ability through the deliberations to then put forward amendments. And if you have consensus from council, then those amendments would run through the budget to get to a final product. So there are a number of steps, but you're right. It would be after committee, it goes to council realm for formal amendments.
I can live with that, Chair.
Okay, so we're at 4.1.1 right now that we've been discussing. Is there any other questions on that part of it? Okay, if not, then I'd like to make a motion to support the present mayor, the draft for 2025 special project budget. Now, as printed or amended, is this where we put in there to go back and look for 1.1? Would that be the amendment that you would put in on this one, or no? That would be, okay, I'll save that for that. That would be for the operating, okay. Okay, thank you. So we'll do, somebody have to make a motion for 4.1.1, because I guess I can't make them.
Sorry, just for clarification, Director Buku, when you were saying that you're still going to refine. So are we recommending this now if there's still more refinement? If we can clarify that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the question, the special projects that you have before you today, if you adopt that and move it forward, I think the 1.1% that you will be giving staff direction on is on the operating side. And if that's a myriad of a few different tools that we would bring back to you and embed in the budget.
I'll move the, as amended.
Second it. Councilor Joyce, all in favor? Thank you. Next, we'll go to 4.1.3, tax-supported capital budget. Councilor Joyce? Oh, I thought you had a question there, but okay.
Chair, do you want us to go, because this is the larger report, do you want us to go by page if we have certain questions on this one?
Yes, I think that'd be a good idea. Yeah, if we could maybe just do a little review on this one, and that might help us just get it started. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and through you. So you'll recall the capital budget is made up of two elements, state of good repair, expansionary. When we last left late last week, we talked about the overall program amount. So the total capital program for 2025 proposed is $128.2 million. That, again, is broken not quite in half, but about 68 million is state of good repair capital projects, and they're broken out in their respective categories and programs. And similarly, expansionary capital budget is just under $60 million, and similarly is broken out by categories. What you had asked last time, and it still forms part of the conversation today, is to inform the overall tax impact. So I'll just remind you that of the $128 million of the total program, approximately 18.7 million is tax support funded. All the remainder, so just over about 110 million, comes from development charges, grants, revenues, other sort of reserves and funding sources. So that was the question that you had posed previously. So it's less than 20% of the total funding. Then after the breakdown sort of overall, again, we go through the programs by category, and you would be able to see in the tables how those individual programs or projects are funded, and it would only be within the asset management reserve column that you can influence the tax rate. That's where the tax support funding runs through in this year. So hopefully that helps to just kind of frame it. And then certainly Director Rojas in particular, I think, but any of us can answer questions about particular projects that you have.
Any questions when you're going through that?
Chair, I was really looking at the broader scope of everything.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
And so, Chair, I do think it's important to sort of highlight that This is an unprecedented capital budget. Like it's at the highest sort of funded rate. It is accelerating or still catching up on deferred projects. These are things that you asked in your deliberations previously. I think it really does give the municipality a great balance of keeping our state of good repair good and not falling behind. And then also looking at expansionary projects that are being driven based on growth. The smaller amount of tax support is in the expansionary area. That is largely funded almost entirely from growth and the various revenues, whereas state of good repair is our existing assets, and we need to maintain good quality on those assets. So I think the other question that was asked was our ability to deliver on this. And that's been a sort of long-standing sort of question. And I think the director very much on point sort of described that, this does reflect the resources that we have, that we're able to deliver in the timeframes that council's established for capital budgets. Some of them aren't in year, some are multi-year projects, but certainly I think this is a great year post-pandemic to really take a leap forward again and get back fully on track with our asset management and our capital.
Councilor Joyce.
This is commentary only. It's not a question, but the majority of our ability to influence to bring the tax rate down in the asset management reserve is roads and bridges. Well, we don't want to touch that. Another key area is fire facilities. Another key area is, where is it? I missed it now. IT, thank you. I was looking for IT. Yeah, so these are other stuff is just, it's so small. The key areas that are expensive, we don't want to touch. That's the problem.
And most of them are through DC and grants and revenue anyway, so I understand what you're saying.
Well, fire facilities is 100% asset management reserve at 1.5 million.
Chair, just another observation too, some of these that are, put into that asset management reserve, some of them are like 10-year projects, like next door, like this is there's a 10-year window where we're doing these expansionary, so it's not just a one-time fund for the 2025 year as well. So we're making those state of good repair commitments, and they're over numerous years as well, so we need to get started on some of these. And as you said, it is 20% of the entire budget is on that tax levy, and again, where we came from and where we are today is just a huge leap, and we do have some opportunities that haven't been fleshed out yet. Like we've come a long way, and it's hard to go any further without having that additional information.
Thanks for that. Any other questions on 4.1.3? Sure, go ahead.
So Chair, through you, and maybe just to mirror Councillor Richardson's last question on special projects. So if you're supportive of the draft sort of recommended capital budget, the next step again would be taking that recommendation forward through the mayor. That would then fine tune the overall budgets. Council would have exactly the same opportunities at the next phase, where you would be looking at the line-by-line budgets. And if council members wanted to provide any amendments, additions, that process would be followed through the deliberations in November. And again, it would be exactly the same. You would propose amendments, and if council accepts those amendments, then they would be reconsidered by the mayor, but essentially that would be the step and the opportunity to do any line-by-line amendments on projects.
Thanks for that clarification. So I need a motion for 4.1.3. Okay, Councillor Joyce, seconded by Councillor Richardson. All in favor? Passed. Thank you. Okay, we'll go into 4.1.4, which is the tax-supported operating budget, which we've already touched on that, but let's review it one more time. Can we just have a quick update on that one, and then I'll make the amendment on that one.
Thanks, Chair. Through you. So the last budget to deliberate here at the committee is the operating budget. I'll let the director sort of talk on the position and the actual numbers. But when you were starting to deliberate this last week, we had tried to frame it, again, similarly on a tax increase measure. The mandate for you was to try to target a 3% overall operating budget tax increase. We've talked about some of the limitations and certainly the pressures related to that. Each year of the operating budget, even leading up to now, so the last couple of years, that pressure has always been there. And certainly you've heard the director has said it and others that we really need to overhaul or leap forward our long-term financial plan. It's about 5 years plus. We've been updating it only sort of in year, but it now needs a more robust forecast for the next 5 years and beyond. What we have been doing, what you have been doing as council sort of in the preceding years though, is starting to manage certain programs and portfolios and trying to get to that sort of true inflationary or cost of living increase on an annual basis. We're not there yet. And you're seeing it in some of the numbers. So we challenged departments to try to meet that 3% target that's outlined in the financial plan. And that was a combination of, again, a target for expenditure, but then looking at our revenues, looking at deferring project, all of the strategies that you've been talking about up to this point. We currently, I'll back up. One area that had very limited ability to look at reductions were the 2 policing budgets in this year. And I say that not because they're not doing what other departments or other agencies are doing, but we haven't put attention like we have in previous preceding years to those portions of the operating budget. So although they were coming in at increases above 3%, and I think Councillor Joyce, you would ask the question sort of to look back historically, what was happening was they were meeting targets through reserves. And they were operating reserves, one-time reserves that were artificially establishing a 3% leading up to this year. It's not unique to policing. There were some other areas where collectively and at council, you directed that some reserves still needed to be drawn on so that we had a stable sort of increase year over year. I would suggest that this is the year to write, if you will, or better write the policing budgets. And that's why you're seeing a separate and distinct 2.2% increase on top of the mandated 3% that the mayor provided to you and that we were working within. You asked the question, Councillor Joyce, I think following last week's deliberations as well, about what our position would then look like in the future. I can't predict exactly where you'll go and where we'll land in 2026, but doing some of these adjustments, it will help the overall budgets, and I would suspect it will help the police budgets in future years so that they aren't experiencing double-digit pressures in each calendar year and what they've experienced in the previous years. So I think it's a time to really look at that and write that portion of the budgets. And then we have more control on the remainder of our operating budgets, and council has more control and oversight on those specifically, like line by line, if I can say it that way. So you know the position that we're coming into today, which right now was the base 3% increase, plus staff are at least proposing a 2.2% increase on operating for policing. I should have prefaced that we currently area rate both services, so that increase would net out for Kawartha Lakes Police Service. That would be levied on Lindsay and Ops residents. And for the OPP increases, that would be the remainder of the city in the OPP service area. We're talking about also a 1.1%, which equates to about $1.6 million as a sort of unfunded, if you will, pressure that still remains today. Although I think we're going to update on how we're starting to look at that particular unfunded pressure. If we're able to come to some consensus sort of broadly on approaches for that, then you would be recommending a draft operating budget through to the mayor that would meet that 3% target. Sorry, 3% plus the 2.2% on policing.
Any questions on it? Councillor Richardson.
Through question to CAL. When we look at our policing numbers for this past year, 2024, how much of an increase was it over the 2023 budget?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have the CKL police portion. We had committed to responding and providing you that information following this meeting, but I believe that we could point you to page from the October 10th presentation. If we could jump, Constance, to slide 24. The 2024 budget for the Kawartha Lakes Police was 10.6. The current ask is 12.283 million. OPP was 8.125 million in 24, with a budget ask of 9.453. And the actuals for 2023 are also on there.
Yeah, that's where I was getting confused, and that's why that question came out, because you look at our actual to date and then the budgeted amount for 2024, and there's like a huge leap. So when does that final bill come in so we know what our actuals are to date?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the OPP bill is billed to us and invoiced. CKL Police runs through our financial system. So similar to other departments, it's a matter of, are their accounts payable up to date? Are their accruals booked? Are they going to spend that full amount in 2024 of 10.266? That is the struggle we in finance have for the entire city, trying to forecast where the 2024 year end will land.
Is there a possibility that they might not spend all of it?
And Mr. Chair, I'm not sure I could speak on behalf of the police board or the police service. We could certainly ask the question of them.
Councillor Richardson.
I guess, thank you through you, Chair. I guess where I'm going is when you look at area rating and look at the increases that we've seen in the last few years and what I'm suspecting is going to continue because of growth and maybe the environment that we're in today, that we have to be very prudent when we move forward because this is an unknown cost for the city.
Did you say it was a no cost for the city?
No, it's an unknown. It is, and I mean, I can't even imagine finance trying to figure out the target on that just just looking at numbers up there. So that's a real struggle that I think the folks in the city of Kawartha Lakes needs to recognize too, is we have some outstanding pressures when it comes to the level of safety that we're providing to our communities. And we can clearly see it on this slide, the impact it's had and what it's going to have. So it's just one of those things when you talk about a special area rated levy, the importance. And it is a target that is hard to predict when you're sitting on this side of the table.
Sorry, Chair, through you, I do want to clarify that I want to split hairs. I don't want to characterize this as a one-time sort of necessarily special levy for particular policing. Right now, and in past budget years, there's 2 police services. They have a service area, and we rate or we levy taxes to those respective areas. I think what we're saying this year is we would levy more than the traditional or the conventional, which kind of works out to an average of 3%. It would still go through that area rating. All we're saying is that it costs more for policing in this given sort of step. And again, it's all relative to that area rate. Let me start with the OPP, because I think that's they are different in terms of how they are funded. The OPP kind of runs on a 2-year cycle, number one. They reconcile their numbers sort of over that period of time. So what they're proposing for 2025, for example, is based on their 2023 actuals. And they don't run a similar year to year, like January to December. Their budget year is April 1st to March 31st of a previous year. So what we just got their billing for 2025, like days prior to your deliberations. So we were able to fine tune that number, but that's based on 2023 and then the projected service level 2 years from now. So I think it was asked sort of previously, can we influence these numbers too? It's tough too, number one. So this is one area where we do look at sort of average type forecasting. The OPP budget in 2024, this year, was about 8.2 million. Their bill for coming in, we're looking at 9.2 or 9.4 million. That's based on a projection of 9.9 million in the following calendar year, because they're looking at it again based on service levels. So we're starting to get a better trend to be able to better budget for this. But certainly it's been for OPP billing. I can also tell you that our messages board lit up with our neighbors that have OPP services that were all, just because of how they're reconciling some of the wages in particular that were resolved in collective agreements, that right across the province, OPP bills were coming in double digits in terms of percentages. So we're not unique by any means, and it's obviously reflective in our numbers here. For KLPS, more conventional, at least in terms of what you would be used to. They would function similar to an operating department. They run from sort of January 1st to December 31st. They were the ones that I would again just characterize that we had a modest reserve in previous years, or they had a reserve that they were able to flatten out expenditures. That reserve's been exhausted. And the pressures and the sort of operating it's not gone away. And you may recall from their presentation, the vast majority of their budget, I think it was 85+% was on wages and salaries and people. So they don't have a lot of room to sort of wiggle and change. Last thing I'll just say, Chair, is, and I think Councillor Richardson was alluding to it, that particular area is where growth is like exponential relative to the rest of Kawartha Lakes. So I would suggest that there is some light at the end of this sort of immediate tunnel where the area rating would then be offset from that additional population, which will be substantially more, relatively speaking, than the OPP service area.
Thanks for that explanation. Any other questions? Councillor Joyce.
Thank you, Chair, through you. And thank you, Councillor Richardson, for pulling that slide up, because I didn't pick up on that before, that the OPP is already over budget this year, and we're not done the year. Anyhow, if we go back to that slide on budget reduction strategy, thank you. The 2.2%, is that, from my interpretation, that's the KLPS, and OPP would be more like 1.5%. Am I correct in that? When we area rate? Is that the combined amount?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is the combined amount for both Kawartha Lakes and OPP. So the 3.345 is comprised of the 2 million plus variance for City of Kawartha Lakes Police and the 1.3 million in OPP. And the reason the 2024 actuals are over the budget are back to CAO Taylor's correspondence from the OPP of late. That puts an additional levy on 2024 as a result of the 2023 reconciliation. So it put us over budget in 24.
Thank you. So that 2.2% though is the not, when we area rate, what will the actual percentage be for OPP and for KLPS?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the additional to the tax base will be the 3.34 or 2.2% above the 3%, specifically for policing. So they already are area rated in their 2024 base, and we could not fit in 10.266 for City of Kawartha Lakes Police in 24, needed a budget pressure of 2 million. That is far exceeding the 3%. So it's above and beyond. So in essence, the area rate would actually be 5.2%. The 3 plus the 2.2 for that area of the police.
I'm not following it because the
Councillor
OPP
Richardson.
charges less than KLPS. So shouldn't the percentage be different when you area rate?
Correct. That's a combined average. You're quite accurate through you, Mr. Chair. The OPP residents and households will pay less per household on their area rate than those within the City of Kawartha Lakes. But again, based on volume of homes, we do this population and the number of growth, as we've heard, is predominantly in Lindsay. So we rerun that calculation every year based on the volume of rate-paying homes within the town of Lindsay and Ops, and we levy the amount the police need, and then likewise in the rural area. The rural area populace isn't growing as much though, so the increase to that budget will be borne by the current taxpayers.
I have a question. When you talk about being over budget with the OPP or city, whatever, I know most of it could be salary and wages, but if there's anything else besides salary and wages, do you look at that and ask questions about that, or are they just allowed to be over budget and we pay?
Through the chair, so they do provide us with a very detailed set of billing. So we're able to scrutinize it. We're able to work within sort of the confines of our, I'll call it our service level or agreement with them for service. We don't have a lot of leverage because we're not levying special services from the OPP. So it's sort of a base level. It's based on per capita. It's based on number of calls. So it's tough to influence that and say, well, don't go to so many calls or don't, right? So it's very much based on a core service. Even their sort of area capital, their fleet, their building facility, it's really just a formula province-wide. They share a lot of their stuff and resources. So I mean, I would suggest that we're paying our fair share relative to what we've signed on for service, for sure. I would suggest there really isn't anything there to be able to influence of any substance to reduce that particular number. The frustration you're feeling, though, is it is a 2-year cycle. And so if policing and calls for service went up in a given year, or complexities, or you'll hear them say like court attendance, things like that, then they're going to reconcile a year later, and those were costs that we weren't forecasting in the original average.
Thanks for that. I understand that. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, through you. Can I ask at this time, maybe when we do a presentation, maybe break that down to, if possible, that area rated, this is how much for OPP and this is how much for Kawartha Lakes Police Services? Because sometimes when you just put it into a dollar, amount when we're presenting to the public, it gives a better idea than just the percentage.
Councillor Joyce.
Thank you. I just have another question here, moving away from police services for a moment. All the numbers, from 2023 to 2024 to 2025, you see a steady progression, except for fleet services. It's really up and down. I mean, I'm not complaining about the budget compared to previous, but like 2023 was quite high. It dropped very low in 2024. It's going back up in 2025. It's a bit of a yo-yo. What's behind all that?
I might be able to, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's maybe when they get delivered, because they order it in 2023 and they might not get them into 2024. I'm not sure if that's correct or not.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we could refer to slide 23 of the October 10th presentation.
So just to confirm then, sort of the question was the volatility, or you're saying it's a little bit more volatile. I guess a couple of things, or maybe observations I could provide to start, and then we'll go from there. We've even, consolidating fleet services, it's not new, but it's fairly new. Like, we don't have 10 and 20 years of trends sort of along with that. How we fine-tuned annually how we fund it as well. Sometimes it's connected to capital, but very often it is linear with either a new service that would be introduced or expansion to the workforce that may require fleet. And I should preface, maybe just for general public interest, fleet isn't just a vehicle with 4 wheels. It's also a lot of the sort of larger heavy equipment that comes along with that we're managing. So almost essentially, if you put fuel in it or plug it in, it's probably under this, at least if you're doing it remotely. So we've been trying to write that combination, but not over forecasting sort of a fleet. The conversation that we had previously was unplanned or sort of forecasted fleet as well. Because we've centralized that function corporately as well. So although it runs in the Public Works budget, it's not all Public Works fleet. In fact, Public Works fleet would be obviously a substantive amount, but it's not more than, like, community services and many of our other operating departments also have fleet. Public Works is responsible for allocating, ordering those vehicles, servicing those vehicles as well. So the whole function, it's almost like a corporate service that they provide for our entire fleet as well. So that just, again, just general commentary that it's not department specific. That is one area, though, that I've been hearing. Fuel costs were volatile, but more importantly, and certainly it hasn't been calmed entirely, was the pandemic effect on sort of fleet access to new vehicles, even access to parts to be able to refurb. In fact, during the pandemic, you may recall, used vehicles were actually sort of the immediate, and they were running a premium above new. And so we're now starting to see a little bit of that come back. All to say that there still is viewed volatility in that particular asset category. It is starting to smooth out a little bit. But what I will say is when I say smooth out, it's not going back down. And I think that's important to leave as well. We sort of had a benchmark pre-pandemic. It leapt up here, and I'm hoping it's somewhere over here. But inevitably, it has exceeded that 3% cost overall.
Thank you. I'm not complaining about the 2025 budget line in that particular area. I guess I worry about 2026. Like, is it going to bounce up to over $1 million again? That's my worry. But thank you.
Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So when we're looking at fleet and when we look in some of our segues, our lists here, a lot of that fleet is under the Public Works Reserve to begin with, isn't it? It's not through the asset management reserves? So are you alluding, Councillor Joyce, that you're concerned about that, that fleet reserve for the future?
Just worried about the volatility of it. I picked up on the up and down there, and again, not complaining about 2025, but I just needed an explanation why it's so volatile.
If I could, through you, Mr. Chair, the transfer to the fleet reserve in order to fund your capital is also in that line. It is not from the city's asset management reserve. We have a separate reserve just for fleet. In order to rectify it, our long-term planning and projections on expansionary pieces, as well as solid timing on repairs and replacement of current vehicles, will help to flatline that extent. And as CAO Taylor responded, we centralize fleet and it works for all of the city, and then they pay a revenue back to the fleet operations for the use of that service.
Councillor Joyce.
Thank you. That leads into another question I have, and I sent an email this morning to that Public Works and Parks have unplanned capital projects of, I know this is capital, but not operating, 2.75 million, but our contracted services are not. A lot of that was for expansionary, but our contracted services are still going up. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around all of that. Because I thought expansionary projects are supposed to bring in efficiencies and lowering contracted services.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the expansionary component just refers to an expansion of that fleet area, for instance, or the parks area. It's supporting some renovations or some major rehabilitations, for instance, in the parks area, and not necessarily bringing efficiencies. I would say it's right-sizing the service level in those parks. Similar with fleet, when we expand our org chart, then we therefore also need to expand the fleet asset category. So it's sometimes for efficiencies, but it's also to support growth in that area and continuing to support that service level.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions going forward? So we're at the point right now to, at 4.1.4, is to make a motion for the tax support operation budget. And at this time, I think we'd make an amendment to that to say that, to send it back to staff to find the 1.1%, which there are some unknown numbers right now that we don't know of for the more growth. You know, you can look at the reserve and provincial partnership that we talked about. So if somebody'd like to make a motion, it's only a recommendation myself, make a motion to support and present the mayor the draft 2025 tax support operating budget with that amendment, if anybody would like to make that motion. Councillor Richardson, seconded by Councillor Joyce. All in favor? Thank you very much. And I'd like to take this time to thank everybody for their hard work that goes into this, and at least it's a start to present. It is the mayor's budget. We can only make recommendations to the mayor, so as long as everybody understands that, but this is a good start, and I want to thank everybody for the hard work and every department that did a great job, and looking forward for that 1.1% little tougher. So thank you very much, everybody. And there's any other business, new business? Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Joyce, second Councillor Richardson, all in favor? Thank you very much.